Hello, hello. Thank you everyone for joining us here today on your lunch hour, for those of you in the Eastern time zone, and to thank you all for sharing your time with us. We are today hosting a historical fiction panel with three incredible writers who've each just had a book released in the last few weeks. Our authors are Sadeqa Johnson, who wrote the very, very moving and powerful Yellow Wife. We have Julia Kelly, who's the author of The Last Garden in England, and Janet Skeslien Charles, who wrote The Paris Library. So welcome to all you guys, and thank you so much for joining us here today. What I wanted to start off by saying is that each of these books is quite different in terms of setting and characterization and plot and topic, but the more I thought about them, the more I felt that there were quite a few commonalities in the way that the characters behaved, in the themes that run through the novels. So I was hoping that I could get each of you to tell our viewers a bit about the plot of your novel, and we can then sort of explore those themes a little bit more. So let's go by order of chronology. So because Sadeqa, your book takes place in 1850, maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about the Yellow Wife.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having us. This is like the highlight of my day. So I'm happy to be here.
Mine too.
The Yellow Wife is the story of a mulatto girl. Her name is Phoebe Dolores Brown. She is 17 when the story opens, and she has been promised freedom on her 18th birthday. She is the daughter of the master of the plantation, Master Jacobs, along with his favorite slave, Ruth, who is the seamstress and the medicine woman on the plantation. Phoebe has been taken care of pretty much her whole entire life. The master's sister took her on as a pet because she didn't have children, and she taught Phoebe to read and to write and to play piano. And so she has this idea that things are going to turn out just perfectly for her. Well, a series of events happen. The master takes a wife, and Phoebe finds herself thrust into the bowels of slavery, where she ends up at the Lapierre jail, which is a punishing center and also a place of trade for slaves. It's one of the most horrific places on earth, particularly in Richmond. The owner of the jail is referred to as the bully trader because he is so horrendous and so just a despicable person. She catches his eye and finds a bit of favor with him, but at very high cost. Phoebe finds herself having to figure out how to survive, not only for her but also for her family. So she's put in some very difficult decisions and things that she needs to get through to get to the other side.
Okay, and I know that you've talked about how readers have found some of these passages hard to read, and that your feedback on that is people actually live these things. So for me, or for you, writing about them is the least you could do, which I totally get. But I'm wondering how at the end of the day you would just close the door on that, because reading it took me like a long list of romances, shall we say, to kind of counterbalance this. Yeah. So how did you close the door on that every day? And when the book was finished, how do you regain yourself?
That's a very interesting question. It is very difficult to spend so much time. It took me 3 years. I was with the book for 3 years between researching and writing the book and reading books by, other slaves who had written their narratives. And, it's a lot to stay in that world. But as you mentioned, I felt like it was necessary. I felt like Yellow Wife was a calling that I had been chosen to write this story. And it was my way of honoring my ancestors, all of our ancestors, and really giving a voice to the people who had no voice. So it was important for me to do my due diligence in that way. But the way I separated myself, I usually write in the mornings, and so I work out in the like that midday afternoon. So I would either go for a run, I would go for a walk, I would listen to music, I would cook dinner. I needed to do something to kind of ground myself, to separate myself from the story, and then be able to move on with my life, take
Mhm.
care of my kids and that sort of thing and be present for them. So, it was intentional for me every day. And I also take breaks, particularly for this book. I took breaks on the weekend where on Saturday and Sunday, I wasn't necessarily writing the book, but maybe I will be thinking about it or I'll be journaling about it, but I wouldn't actually go sit at the computer. That was kind of my way of giving myself some space to breathe. So when I got back to my work on Monday, I was kind of fresh and not worn out.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's incredibly powerful, and you did an amazing job with it. And yeah, those characters just come completely alive. Um, so thank you. And so, Julia, your book is up next, beginning in 1907. Do you want to tell us a little bit about The Last Garden in England?
Sure. So, The Last Garden in England is a book with three timelines. So, we start in 1907, and this book is all written around a historic garden at an English country estate. So, in 1907, we meet Venetia Smith, who is the garden's designer, who has really come up to this place at the request of a wealthy industrialist to give kind of gravity and weight to his country home. And she meets people there who will eventually change her life. If we move to 1944, which is the second timeline, we're in the middle of the war, and there are three women who are all interconnected due to this garden. A land girl named Beth, who is new to Highbury, which is the place that this is set in. Stella, who's the cook at the big house where this garden exists, and then actually the owner of the house as well, Diana, who's relatively recently widowed. And she's both coping with her grief of losing her husband and also the fact that her home has been requisitioned for use as a convalescent hospital. So she feels as though she doesn't really have a chance to mourn and a chance to put her life back together again, because suddenly an army hospital has shown up on her doorstep and is sharing space in her home. So that section then leads to present day, which is when we meet Emma, who is a garden designer in her own right. Her hero is Venetia Smith, and when she gets the opportunity to restore the abandoned gardens at Highbury House, she jumps on the opportunity. And Emma is the one who is unfurling family mysteries and things that happened in the past that are hidden in this garden. So she's really the one who's a bit of a detective for these other stories that are unfolding simultaneously.
So when you do that, when you have three time periods and five main characters,
Yes.
how do you how do you make each of them a separate, unique individual voice as you're writing?
I think the big thing that I tried to do going into the book was making sure that I had a very clear idea of who each of these women were, what their background was, but also really what their motivation was. Everybody has different wants and needs that they bring to their own life and their own decisions. And so I wanted to make sure that the decisions that these women made really tied back into that, and they felt like full people, not just characters on a page, because there was a richness to their reasoning why. And sometimes, when we read novels, we can be frustrated with the characters, we can be really elated when something good happens to them. And I think you become invested in a character when you really have a sense of where they're coming from, and they feel like a person who has a full, rich life before we ever open the page with them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, it's such an incredible accomplishment that you managed to wrap all these threads together, or roots, I suppose, is
Yes, yes, a
tendrils
lot of, a
and
lot
all
of
that.
gardening metaphors. Thank
Yeah,
you very
it's
much.
great. And Janet, do you want to take us through the Paris Library?
Sure. Well, to start out, I'll say it's World War II and Paris is occupied. There's a war on words. It's Nazis versus librarians, and the librarians win. This is the true tale of the librarians who defied the Nazis in order to hand deliver books to Jewish readers in Paris. And I learned about this story when I worked at the American Library in Paris as the programs manager, kind of coordinating events just like this. It was a great pleasure to be able to do that. I started out by researching the real life librarians. The first one is Dorothy Reader, which is a wonderful name for a librarian. She came to Paris alone in 1929, and she started in the periodical section of the library. She worked her way up to the role of directress in 1936. When war was declared in 1939, the US ambassador told everyone, American citizens, to leave France, but she and the staff remained at the library throughout the war. And they delivered 100,000 books to French and English soldiers from 1939 to May of 1940. The next librarian I researched was Boris Nechayev. He's Russian, and he lied about his age to join the army in Russia so he could fight in the Russian Revolution. He came to Paris with his brother. They came hoping for peace, but instead found themselves in the middle of another war. I interviewed Boris's daughter, who was in the next room when he was shot through the lung by the Gestapo. And she said that he made a full recovery, never gave up smoking his beloved gitans, and worked at the library until he retired. And then two Canadians, a mother-daughter team, Evangeline and Olivia Turnbull, who worked at the library. Evangeline married Ollie Turnbull in 1915, and then he shipped off to war in France in World War I. He died there. And then Olivia and her mother Evangeline went to Paris and worked at the library. And I love the idea of a mother-daughter team. I'd love to work with my mom, unlike Julia's character, Emma. But so it was very interesting to do the research and look into these real life characters.
So the other part of your novel takes place in the 80s, and I kind of loved all the 80s references, like Hope and Bo, Days of Our Lives, the Giorgio perfume, you know, the fairy dresses and all that stuff. So why did you choose the 1980s to balance that out, as opposed to the 70s or the 90s?
Well, I had a really hard time putting words in Dorothy Reader's mouth. I think for those of us who do historical fiction and we work with real life characters, there's a big reverence there, and it's really hard to put words in their mouth. At least for me, I was afraid of making mistakes or having the characters say something that they wouldn't, or showing them to be someone that they're not. And so I needed different narrators. And so my narrator is Odile, and she eventually went to Montana, which is where I'm from. And I grew up next to a war bride, and from France. And so that's how I started with my love of France and love of French. And that's why I'm here today, because of the war bride Claudine that I grew up next to. And so I just wanted to have someone look at Odile the war bride the same way I looked at my war bride Claudine, with that admiration and that love. And when I've been here in Paris for a long time, and I just wanted to write about Montana in the 80s. And I wanted a parallel with the Cold War, where we just never really knew what was going to happen in terms of the Soviets. We start the novel, the Soviets have just shot down a passenger airline plane that was going from Anchorage, Alaska to Seoul, Korea. And so there was a feeling that these people would kill anyone, even children. So I just really wanted to write about that time period.
That's really interesting. I never made that connection, but now that you say it, it's obvious. So just wanted to say, for anybody who's just joining us, welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us here for our historical fiction panel with these incredible authors, Sadeqa Johnson, Janet Skeslien Charles, and Julia Kelly. So as we continue, we've just had the authors talk about the plots of their books a little bit. And I wanted to go back to that idea that although these are very disparate ideas on the surface, there's a lot underneath that I think is common to them. And one of the things that I see that in is these very strong female leads. The women in these books are indomitable, they are feisty, they are proud. And I wanted to explore a little bit like where that strength comes from in each of their instances. I mean, Phoebe is a good example. Like, I mean, I can't imagine there were a lot of enslaved women in her position that would have carried herself with such dignity and self-awareness of who she was and what she wanted. Where do you think that strength came from, Sadeqa?
Well, Yellow Wife was inspired by the story of Mary Lumpkin and the Lumpkins jail, a story that I discovered by walking the Richmond Slave Trail in Richmond, Virginia. And the thing that drew me to the story from the beginning was the idea that Mary Lumpkin was married to this man. And I couldn't figure out if it was a marriage of survival or if it was a marriage of love. And the fact that she had 5 children with him and they lived on this half acre of land where the most horrific things were happening to fellow enslaved people. What type of strength would it take for her to endure this marriage, to endure this life, and to raise these children and try and get them out of slavery? And that was kind of the beginning of my curiosity and the nucleus that attracted me to the story. So when I was creating Phoebe Dolores Brown, some of it came from Mary Lumpkins, but when I start to write a character, I think all the characters through the 4 novels that I've written, there's always the strong protagonist woman who has to go through something. She has to climb a mountain. She has to go through the fire and what she's like when she gets to the other side. So much so that when I was writing Phoebe, it was almost like she started to, well, it was definitely like she started to take on a life of her own. She told me what she wanted to do.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and in particular, I mean, when I really saw her feistiness was kind of at the end of part 1, where she stands up to the mistress of the plantation and tells her, "You're not going to hit me. You're not going to put your hands on me again." And I thought, oh my gosh, like that takes such strength for a teenage girl to go up against her mistress on the plantation. And she kept doing things like that throughout the story. She kept taking risks. She kept forcing me into situations where she had to kind of overcome them. So it's something that I love to do. I guess I believe that I am one of those strong women. And so all of my characters have a little bit of me in it, but also just listening to my characters and letting them take me on their journey is a strength that I have to have and not want to control the story so that I can go down this road of where they need to be. And she continuously showed me on the page that she was a strong woman.
Yes, she was. Janet, how about you and Odile? Where does her strength come from, do you think?
I think from a very young age, looking at my neighbor Claudine, I knew how brave she was to have left her friends and her family, her country, and even her language behind. So I have a real respect for these war brides who crossed oceans with someone that they didn't know very well and started a new life elsewhere. I think I wrote about an email order bride and a war bride in my 2 novels, and I'm really interested in journeys. And I do think that when people move to a new place, they have to reinvent themselves, or they have to start over and really evaluate things. And so I think part of that journey makes people stronger.
Yeah, for sure. And Julia, what about Venetia?
You
She's, a woman working in a man's world.
She is, yeah. So Venetia is a garden designer in 1907, which is really not a common occupation for women. Certainly not women of her class. She is by birth a lady because her father was a gentleman, and she has carved out a life for herself and really not just a livelihood, but also an artistic life as well. So, gardens and designing gardens, it's not just plants and planting and knowing kind of the functional side of gardening. It's really understanding color and structure and shape. And it can be like painting. And one of the women that I actually used as the inspiration for Venetia, who's not a real person, but one of those women was Gertrude Jekyll, who also was a single woman who would go around the country and design gardens. And she was a lady, and she was also an incredibly prolific garden writer, to the point where people who are passionate about gardens often will still reference her, and a lot of her influence can still be seen, and especially in English border gardens to this day. And I think you have to be a resilient person to break the mold a little bit, even if it's in a sort of seemingly quiet way with gardens. This would be, a livelihood that would take you out of your home and would be exposing you to different households and different people, and you would be paid for the work that you did. And that's unusual. And so I think I think it sounds like with all three books here, there's a level of resilience and a level of determination with all of the women who you know, are moving through these worlds. And I think a lot of it is that it's deciding to do something that's different and that's against the mold, and making that a really significant part of the character. I hope shines through.
Yeah, no, sure, I agree. But I want to just go back, Janet, to what you said about Odile or other war brides coming to a country that they don't know much about, they aren't very familiar with. And another commonality I thought through these books was that concept of belonging. You know, we see it in Phoebe, where she's not quite of the house, not quite of the field. She's sort of betwixt and between. And even in later life, she has the favor of the jail owner, but she's also working. You know, she's the seamstress there. And you know, we see it in Odile's feeling of like-mindedness when she's at the library and she with her peers, and she really feels like she belongs. And we see it in Julia's book with all of the characters, really, from, you know, Diana and Benicia and Emma looking for a place to call home, and Beth. So I think that's so I wonder if that's something that was conscious when you were writing it, or because, you know, a couple of you split your time, different countries. Sadeqa, you've moved around quite a bit. Is that something that was a conscious thread through your novels, or was that just something that came out of you naturally on the page?
I think for me, it was something that just naturally came out on the page. For Phoebe, belonging to two different worlds, I think for enslaved people, and particularly for African Americans during that time in the 1800s, color played a really big decision on where they were seen in society. And so, you know, they were often split up on the plantation, where the darker skinned people worked in the field and the lighter skinned people worked in the house. The children who were fathered by the masters normally had a little bit more versus those who did not. And so that played a really big part in their lives. So it was kind of easy for me to sit her between these two worlds and her not belonging to either, and trying to figure out, you know, how she would move through the story and making her uncomfortable in different situations. I think the time period really lent to that for her story.
Mm-hmm.
I
Janet,
think,
you have thoughts
oh,
on that?
sorry.
Or Julia, sorry.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
You go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, sort of it's a different take, but I'm an expat. Obviously, I'm American, but living in London, and I think that throughout my entire life, friendship has always been a very strong driver for me. I lived in New York, which is kind of a city of found families in some ways. And then moving to London and having to sort of restart that network. Although my family is here, I think that makes me very conscious of it. And then also having this feeling of, you know, being American and British at the same time, and trying to sort of reconcile those things and find your place. And when writing Beth, I think I wanted to put that sense of sort of going to a new place, feeling compelled to, you know, find your home amongst people, and sort of find your way. And then Emma as well, and really all of the characters. I'm glad you mentioned the idea of, you know, finding home, because I think that's a really strong driver. And through all of my books, I do try to write about friendships, because I think friendships, especially amongst women, have been so important in my life and so shaping in who I am. So that's definitely a large part of that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Janet, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think for Odile, she doesn't believe in soulmates, but she believes in bookmates, people who are bound by their passion for the same book. And so she really finds a lot of bookmates at the library, and she does find a place where she belongs. And I think that's really important. That's part of our journey, I think, through life, is to find the people who are found families, or the people that we can really be friends and really be ourselves with. I know I feel like a lot of times I'm an outsider, and in daily life that's very challenging, but in my fiction it's very important, because my characters are always in difficult situations. They're always on their own, and they've always got to navigate challenging situations, whether it's dealing with different cultures or different languages or different customs or different expectations. It's very important in my fiction. These are very important themes in my fiction. So yes, in my book, Odile tells a younger Lily, love will come and go, and come again, but friendship is really forever. And you've really got to cherish your friends. And I do feel like as a society, we put so much emphasis on finding love or getting married. And in fact, we should be putting a lot, or that same effort, into maintaining our friendships, maintaining our relationships with families if we can. It's not always possible. But yes, I do feel like friendship is really important in these books.
Yeah, and a conscious thread for you then. That's great. Motherhood, also a big
Sorry, I'm only laughing because I literally was like, oh, I remember thinking about that and motherhood while I was writing this book, and then you just said motherhood. It's like you're reading
motherhood again takes many forms in this book, in these books, many different permutations, from a place of real sorrow for a couple of the characters, to something that's joyful for others. And how do you feel about the sacrifices that women made in each of your time periods to help their kids, or to be a mother at all? There's always seems to be a struggle in each of these novels, to not only become a mother, but to become a successful mother. And I thought that was a really important sort of message in all of those, in all of your books. So, I mean, Janet, from Margaret's struggle to be a good mother and what that meant for her during wartime, to provide for her child, and Julia, the sorrow of Venetia and Diana, and the heartbreakingness of that, and then Sadeqa, like Phoebe's, and all those children that just passed through her life. Just really, really a powerful message, I think, about motherhood. And would you agree with that? And what do you think? Do you think motherhood struggles today are the same?
I have to say, I'm not a mother, so anything that I've put in the book is from watching friends and family kind of go through that. And I think for me, one of the things I was interested in was taking some of the experiences that I've seen people I know go through, when it comes to what is it that you're willing to sacrifice, and what is your identity as a woman, as a mother. How do you reconcile those things when sometimes it's not, it doesn't necessarily make it an easy choice. And I don't want to say any more without spoiling things, but I do think that, having to ask yourself, what is it that you want? And I think that it's interesting exploring the theme of motherhood with characters who aren't also necessarily directly mothers, but sort of have been placed in a position of caring for a child, or being that person. But again, it's all coming from secondhand experience for me, so I don't want to speak too much out of turn.
Well, I thought Stella was really interesting in that she was very forthright about, she would do her duty by, taking in her nephew, but she really didn't feel motherly.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a really good take on her being strong in that time period, to be able to do I think she really did what she thought was best for him.
Yeah,
I couldn't give him what he wanted.
I think people really, will, basically very, very early on in the book, so this is not a spoiler, Stella has her nephew essentially dumped on her by her sister, who's a bit of a, not maybe the most reliable person in the world. And so she has to make the decision to set aside her own hopes and her own goals in order to take care of her nephew. And in some ways, it really isn't a decision. The decision has been made for her, but she is absolutely going to do everything she can for him, but it's not a natural fit for her. She doesn't feel like this is, she can't give him the love and the things that he needs necessarily. And she sees that very quickly, I think, and really struggles with that. Because I think there is a real sense of guilt that she can't do that. She can't do that for him. She can't be his mother, and neither should she be. That's not who she is. He absolutely has a mother. But I thought, I wanted to play with the idea of a woman who doesn't have those natural instincts that a lot of people talk about and doesn't feel as comfortable with this role, but still really feels compelled because it's the right thing to do to take care of this child.
Yeah, for sure. And having, from your point there, another similarity that I thought was prevalent in all these books was that idea of ambition, that each of these characters, each of these main women have ideas to become something other or more than what they were born to. And I think that that's a really interesting way that historical fiction kind of appeals to all the readers today, is that sense of reaching for something else. And that a lot of books today deal with that topic, but in historical fiction, it's almost easier in a way because there are different constraints, but that are more overt, I guess we could say, in society. So I really like the idea that all these women were striving for something more, and they didn't let their hardship stop them. In the end, they kind of got where they wanted to be, which I thought was really an accomplishment for all these books.
And when you talk about ambition, I felt like in Yellow Wife, ambition and motherhood kind of went together, because for Phoebe, as a child, she was always raised. Her mother was a very strong woman, and she always told her that you're a slave in name, but never in your mind. And so she was constantly threading that through for her daughter, like, don't settle, don't feel lesser than. This is just the paperwork. You're a slave just on paper, but never in your mind. And so that thread of motherhood and how strong she was embedded in Phoebe, so that when she had her children, I think when I first started the story, I thought Phoebe's motivation was freedom for herself, freedom for her and her true love. But as the story moved along, it became freedom for her children. It kind of switched on. It switched over. And, that the thing that attracted me to the story, I do have 3 children. And so I remember when I was on the slave trail and I learned that Mary Lumpkins had these 5 kids in this horrific situation on this small plot of land where all of these horrific things were happening. I kept thinking, how did she do it? How did she do it? How did she do it for herself? And how did she do it for her children? And I think that as Phoebe moves through the story and she has those impossible decisions that she has to make, at the end of the day, it's always for the betterment of her children. And she can dare to be ambitious because of the betterment of her children.
That's interesting. Yeah, for sure. And I felt like in Phoebe's position, that the children, I thought it was very interesting the way it ended up, with 3 of the girls moving away and 1 staying with her. And I kind of wondered, when you talk about Mary Lumpkin being the inspiration for that, did she have the same experience with her children?
Yeah, I tried to stay as close to the truth where I could. There was not a lot of information that I found specifically on Mary Lumpkin, but I did find information on women like her. And so one of the things that I read was that her daughters had gone up to Ipswich, Massachusetts, for school, and then they never came back. And so that was one of the threads that I threaded through the story as I was writing it.
Interesting. Okay, so each of you has included real people mentions in your books. And I'm wondering how as writers, you kind of walk that fine balance. Janet, as you said, you didn't want to put words in real people's mouths, but these are very real presences in the storylines. And what are the advantages and the disadvantages of including real life people in your books?
I think the stories are just so fascinating. And for me, I look at so many history books and women have been completely erased. So for me, it was really important to show the contributions of Dorothy Reeder, the Countess from Ohio, Claire de Chambrun, the two Turnbulls, the mother-daughter team, to really show that women were here and they were very active. And it was really an honor for me to be able to write their stories. But that said, they are so incredible. The ambassador, when the Nazis were arriving close to Paris, the ambassador sent out another letter telling Americans to get out. And again, these librarians stayed and really and dealt with really difficult situations. They lost so much weight. They went through such hard times and were able to band together. It was really wonderful to write about that, and then look at society today and see some of the parallels. You talked about motherhood in books and our thoughts on today. And I feel like today with COVID, mothers are really the ones who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and it's been really hard. And they're the ones who are moving out of the workforce. And so I think it's been just a really challenging time for everyone.
Mhm. And I think too, in each of your books, there's this looming prejudice for race and color, to religion, to class and sex. And as you say, those parallels between society today are still there and still quite strong in many ways. So I think shining a light on these different kinds of stories is just a fascinating way to make history, again, more accessible and meaningful to people today. So grief. There's also a lot of grief in each of these books. And I'm wondering, as writers, do you kind of feel that you have to have the tension of grief to enrich the instances of joy? Does that make sense?
I don't know that I feel like it's necessary in every book, but it's necessary when the story calls for it, which is a bit of a cop-out answer, I know, but it's the one I'm going to give. I used to write historical romances, which obviously tonally very different from what I'm writing right now. And I remember when I first switched over to writing historical fiction, I got a lovely note from a reader saying, I really love your books. I just want to know, is anybody going to die in your next book? And I thought, it's set in World War II, so I don't really know how to answer this question in a way that doesn't sound flippant. It's just it is a different subject, and I think especially when you're dealing with periods of time that had a lot of tragedy. So whether it's the American South in the 19th century, or it's World War II Paris, or World War II Warwickshire in the UK, you are going to often deal with stories that touch on that. So I think that for me, it really is driven by what the content of the story necessarily needs.
Yeah.
For me, it's just my knowing as a writer that I have to let my characters go and that I can't protect them, and that bad things need to happen to them in order for them to be three-dimensional, in order for people to really care, and in order for them to get to the other side of the story. I have to be willing to let them get dirty, let them get hurt, let them have grief, let them feel all of those emotions. And it's not always easy. I know, I remember when I was writing my second novel, and Second House from the Corner, and there was another mother and children. My kids were really small at this time, and so was hers. And she was separated from her children. And as I was writing it, I was bawling, so it's important, I think, in order to see the full character, for them to actually have to go through things that hurt.
Yeah. Well, I bawled in each of them, so I'm telling you that right now.
Good. That means we did our jobs.
It surprised me. I'm new to Instagram, and my book came out in Italy first, and then in France, and then in Canada and the UK and US. And I was really surprised by the quotes that people chose to highlight on Instagram, and it was the quote about grief.
Yes, yes. I
That's
had
the
that written down too.
yeah, that's the
Lily's
quote.
quote.
Of
Yeah.
400 pages, that's the quote. And so it really is interesting what resonates with readers. And I was really touched to see that, because I think we're all going through a really hard time right now. A lot of us haven't seen our families in a long time, friends in a long time.
Yeah.
So I was really glad in a small way to maybe help people know that they're not alone.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left of this portion of our hour. And what I want to do is, Janet, Odile plays a game with the people that she meets, or the people that she writes about, to name their favorite dead author and their favorite living author. So I want to do that with you guys. So
No. You make us choose.
Who wants to go first?
Oh, well, I have my favorite live author, Anne Patchett. I just love her book, Bel Canto. I just think it's a masterpiece. I love her sly sense of humor. I just love how she brings different people together in a really stressful situation and shows how we are similar, despite any kind of difference we might have. And then I love Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. I just think it's a masterpiece. And so she's
You mentioned that in the Paris Library. That's one of the ones.
Well, yes, I really, along with Jean Reese, it makes me so happy when people write to me and said, your book was good, and now I'm going to go discover Their Eyes Were Watching God or Good Morning Midnight. That's really the highest compliment I can get.
Amazing. And who's your favorite dead author? Was that?
I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't have a favorite living author, because I think I'm kind of corny, and like whatever I'm reading that makes me like, oh my gosh, I can't stop turning the page, then that author becomes my favorite for the moment. But as far as dead authors, today is Toni Morrison's birthday. And I do remember as a teenager, my dad taking me to a bookstore in Philadelphia and me actually purchasing the book. And I still have that copy today, and it was The Bluest Eye. So I would definitely say Toni Morrison. And then the other one that I was also exposed to as a teenager that really changed my life was Maya Angelou.
Yeah, both brilliant. Both brilliant.
My answer is going to change depending on the day and, all of those things. But I'm going to be cheeky and do 2 of each, I think, if that's okay, if that's allowed.
Yeah.
So Persuasion is my favorite book, and I recently just reread it. I was moving and I needed something that was just an extreme comfort read. And I love that book because every time I read it, I get something new out of it. So I Jane Austen and Elizabeth Gaskell are my favorite dead authors, I suppose. And I really love, and I think, we'll read everything of both A.S. Byatt and William Boyd as well. So both pretty much automatic reads for me, although there's a lot to still read. Prolific authors are wonderful.
Lightweight.
Yeah, exactly. A lot to work my way through, but I'm like you, Sadeqa. I'm anybody who is making me happy because I'm reading their book and I can't put it down. It sounds great to me. So.
Yeah. And so, Sadeqa, I saw an interview with you with the Philadelphia Library where you mentioned that, that it had a huge influence on your life. And of course, Janet, Paris Library. Also, books and learning in libraries have a huge influence for you. Julia, do you have a favorite library?
I do. I used to live in New York, and I was a broke graduate student in New York, and I would walk to school, to my graduate school classes every day. And I would walk by the Morningside Heights Library, branch of the New York Public Library, which has a fantastic hold system. So you could walk in, you could grab your books, check them out, and go. And I think that's what got me through graduate school. And I had been doing so much academic reading for my undergraduate degree before that. It really was the thing that reinstated my love of historical fiction and romance and mystery and all these things that kind of make up most of my my reading day to day now. So I have a lot of affection for that particular branch of the New York Public Library. It's also just incredibly pretty. So
That helps every time. So we've got some questions from readers. I'm going to go through them. So I guess this is for all of you. Does any one thing really stand out to you in your research that surprised you? Just something you couldn't wait to put in your story?
I think for me, I didn't really as many pre-Civil War books that I've read about slavery. Most of them took place on plantations, so I knew a lot about what plantation life was like for slaves, but I had no idea what city life was like. And so a few things that really surprised me was the fact that the enslaved people were able to hire themselves out, where they went to particular streets in Richmond, they stood on the corner, they had a note from their master offering to hire them out. They went and worked for however many days it would be, and then they would take the money back to the plantation. And I guess I didn't know that that trust system was there.
Mm.
The other thing that I didn't realize was that, because slavery was such a big business during that time period, I didn't realize that the people who were in charge were like the pariahs of society. So the reason why the jailer picks Phoebe as a mulatto girl to be, his mistress is because no white man would marry his daughter to a jailer, to a traitor, because it was a dirty business. They were looked at as the pariahs. And so I didn't realize that there was this whole other society of people within the context of slavery in the 1800s.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the book, I remember.
Mhm.
And I thought that was really interesting. So, okay, question about what are you all reading now that is out, and what books are you looking forward to in 2021?
I just read a fantastic book I'm very happy to do a plug for. So Erica Roebuck's The Invisible Woman is about the real life spy, Virginia Hall. I'm actually going to interview her later today at 4 o'clock. And I just thought it was fabulous. She is such a complex, interesting character. The book is completely gripping. Virginia Hall was a spy who was working in Lyon, and her network was actually compromised, and she ended up escaping. And this book picks up when she is parachuted back into France to work with the resistance movements in that area. Basically, these guerrilla soldiers. And I just thought that book was absolutely fabulous. So I'm very, very excited to get to ask her lots of nerdy questions here pretty soon.
Is that a fiction book, or it's
It is fiction. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that sounds amazing.
This is, I don't know. Oh, you can't see the cover. I'm so sorry. It's just breaking up a little bit. It's Ida Be the Queen. So this is what I'm reading right now. And I highly recommend it for everyone. It's really an amazing story, and the author is even more, is just as amazing in her tenacity in getting the attention for Ida B. Wells. And then I can't wait for Genevieve Graham's Letters from Across the Sea. That's a big one that I'm
really good
about.
Yeah, that's coming soon, I think in a few months this year. Okay, this question is for Sadeqa. How did you find the switch from writing romance to historical fiction? Do you prefer writing in one space over the other? Would you go back to writing more romance or continue in this genre? 3 questions.
Great question. So it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be from the switch, I thought it was going to be harder. I had built it up in my brain like, this is an impossible task. I don't think I can do it. What am I thinking? I'm barking up the wrong tree. But once I actually got into it, I realized that my writing was still very similar, but I just needed to bring in the setting and the feel and the taste and the smells of what it was like to be in 1850 and how they dressed and, you know, the way they spoke. But really the essence of my writing pretty much stayed the same. People who read Yellow Wife and people who have read And Then There Was Me will say, oh my gosh, I recognize that that's your writing, but it's just set in a different time period. So it wasn't as difficult as I thought. I'm not sure. I never say never about anything. I actually am working on a second historical fiction novel right now, which does not take place as far back. It's not the 1800s. I brought it a little bit closer. So I'm in the 1950s, which is a beautiful world all of its own, set in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. So we will see. I've learned that I need to just be open as a writer and see what spirit gives me and just follow my calling.
Yeah, yeah. What's next for you, Janet?
My book just came out last week, so I'm just enjoying meeting other authors, talking about our work, and I'm just going to enjoy that for a moment because it's been a long time.
Are you still watching Kim's Convenience? Because I remember when I met you like a year ago, you were like, why isn't everybody watching Kim's Convenience?
I love Kim's Convenience. Why isn't everyone watching Kim's Convenience? I haven't watched the last episode because my parents told me it was sad and it ended on a cliffhanger. So I'm desperately waiting for the next season to find out what it is.
Okay, so you're taking it easy. And Julia, what's next for you?
So I have another book coming up. I just got edits back yesterday night.
I saw the cover on your website. It's beautiful.
Thank you. I'm really, the art department treats me very, very well. So it's called The Last Dance of the Debutante. And it's all about a young woman who is one of the last class of debutantes to be presented before Queen Elizabeth. So the debutante presentations ended after 1958. And she's sort of on the precipice of making some major decisions in her life. And there is because it's my book, there's a big family secret at the center of it and everything starts to unwind. And right after this conversation, I have a call with my editor to talk about making some tweaks and some changes to make it better. But I'm really excited about it. It's been a really fun exercise writing in a slightly different era. It's post-austerity Britain, and there's change in the air during this time. So I've really been enjoying that.
Amazing. Yeah, I know Odile says she never judges a book by its cover. She likes to like go in and see the middle. But Julia, the cover of your book I did see on your website, and it's beautiful.
Thank you. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. So we have a question about some writers are more comfortable writing in isolation, while others like the sense of community and inspiration that comes with bouncing ideas with other writers in their community. To each of the authors today, which writing process do you tend to follow?
Oh, I'm by myself for the most part.
You're by yourself.
Yeah, I'm by myself. It's normally a conversation between me and my agent for a really long time, and then it kind of sprouts from there.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. I tend to have conversations with my agent, talk to my editor, go off and do my own thing. And if I get stuck, I usually can unstuck myself. But if I can't, then maybe I'll have another conversation. But I don't tend to bring other people into the process until I've at least got the structure and the developmental edit done, because I feel like I don't want to deviate too far from the original idea unless something is going really horribly wrong, which has happened before. So,
so do all of you, do you or have you ever belonged to a book club?
Many failed book clubs.
Wine drinking book clubs.
I would agree. Many failed book clubs.
Yeah. Janet?
I belong to a writing group, and within our writing group, we meet especially since the confinement started here in March of last year. We've been meeting weekly, and so it's really nice to exchange work and to have just kind of communication, because everything has been so closed and just it's nice to have that link with the outside world. So we do read books and discuss books, and it's really wonderful to discuss our work in progress as well as our as well as the books we love. And I love getting recommendations from book clubs too. And I love meeting with book clubs. So.
Well, I love that on each of your websites you say, you know, you're happy to virtually meet with book clubs, and I think that that's amazing and really rewarding for everybody who reads your books to get that different perspective right from you.
There was a tweet that was going around, I think it was earlier this week, and somebody apparently had messaged an author saying, "Oh, my book club's reading your book," and the author DM'd them and said, "I'll pop into the last 15 minutes of your book club if you like." And there were screenshots as with the surprise from everybody from the book club. Please, I want that to happen. I was telling my sister and my brother-in-law, I want to be the surprise guest on a book club. So I'm just waiting for my moment to shine here.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It's like being the video girl, right? A celebrity pop-up in a music video.
It's the most important thing too, as an author, to talk to book lovers, you know,
Yeah.
because they see stuff in the book. I often get questions, was this your intention? And I'm like, no, that wasn't, but golly, thank you for pointing that out. You know, like the discussion with them is always so rich and robust. I really look forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, if it's a good book club that takes the time to really read your books and discuss them and explore them and get something out of them, I think it's really important for everybody involved. Okay, so the next question is, can you think of any historical fiction authors that you really admired when you first started?
Sandra Gulland.
Who was that?
Sandra Gulland, I think is her name. She wrote the Josephine trilogy.
Okay.
Josephine Bonaparte, and I just thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
I also love Philippa Gregory. I just Whiteacre, her novel Whiteacre, I just thought was brilliant.
Yeah.
For me, I would say Kathleen Grisham. She wrote The Kitchen House, which was fantastic. I would also say Kate Quinn. I'm right now listening to the Alice Network, which I don't want it to end, so I had to stop listening because it's just so good.
Yeah.
And Dolan Perkins Valdez, she wrote Winch. That was another book that really opened my heart. You know, it's not too many books that I've read twice. I would say I read Winch twice, and I read Mama by Terry McMillan twice, because they did something inside of me that made me feel like I had to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think that's the last question. I'm getting the notice to wrap up. I did want to say thank you and to encourage all our viewers to read these books and buy these books. And there's actually on the event page, there are 25 independent booksellers across Canada that have signed copies of these for sale, that if that's of interest to you, you can look for them on the event page. And maybe just one last question. If you were casting a movie, who would you want to play Sadeqa Phoebe, Janet Odile, and Julia? I'm gonna say Diana, who was my favorite. Who would you cast?
I have no idea. I'm really bad at this game. I never have images of people in my head when I write the books. So I always ask people, who would you put in the role? And that turns the question around.
I think I would do Rosamund Pike for Diana.
I like that. Okay.
I think she can do anything.
She can. I really like her a lot. So
I like her too. There we go. Okay.
That will be my answer now.
Yeah, get on it. So Janet, who would you want to play Odile?
I think Emma Stone can do no wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she can do no wrong. It's true. And I think she's got that sort of international flair as well, that she could really pull off somebody who's French. And Sadeqa, yours is hard because Phoebe's so young.
I know. And so an actress who I hope is not aged out, who is my absolute favorite, is Journey Smollett. She was in Lovecraft Country. She's my, I love her. I love her. I love her. I love her. So she would be my number one choice. But just recently watching Bridgerton, I love the character who played Mrs. Thompson, the girl with the big curly hair who finds herself in trouble. I thought, if she could do a good American accent, she would be a really good, Phoebe.
Did everybody watch Bridgerton?
Oh, yes,
It was good, right?
it was. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I just saw yesterday they casted somebody for season 2. So I think we'll look forward to that.
Absolutely.
So I just want to say thank you. Thank you. It's 1 o'clock exactly. So thank you to all of you for taking this time with me and chatting about things that are so important to you and to the readers who love your book so much. And to say thank you to the viewers who have tuned in as well. And just all the best with whatever comes next for you. I know it's going to be amazing. So thank you again.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.